about to start this drawing, and I've done this drawing for, you know, the head of, the Secretary of Education in Slovakia. I've done it for amazing people. Sir Ken Robinson, do you guys know him?
Yeah.
Yes, he's like one of my big heroes. I got to do this diagram for him. I'm one of those people who kind of can't think about something until he can draw it. Like, I don't feel like I understand it unless I can make a diagram. I recognize it as something about me. It's not something that everybody needs to do, but it's just something about me. So, and when I think about this, I have to think about it in comparison to a traditional classroom, because it's a shared experience for most Americans, and I think it sounds like everybody in Denmark kind of the same. Do you have a day with a lunch break in the middle, and then you have classes the rest of the afternoon and in the morning? And what time does your day start?
8 o'clock.
8 a.m.? Even for teenagers? Yeah. Don't you care about the mental health of teenagers?
No.
Okay.
Maybe a quarter.
I'm going to call the UN and they'll be visiting your lovely country. What time does it end? 15?
3 p.m.
3 p.m. Oh, 15. Yes. 15, 16, whatever. Okay. And then how about lunch? Middle of the day? 12?
Yeah, 12.
Okay, great. So we have enough in common that we're all basically doing the same things that the Prussians did back when they were fighting the Russians, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. 8 a.m. to 3 in the afternoon. And if you're anything like us, the order of the classes in here makes no sense whatsoever. Is that like us? Like, you might come in the morning and you might start off with math, and then you do some history. Help me out. What's another class that you would do? Something Danish? Okay.
But I think normally 2 by 2, like 1.5 hours each.
Yeah.
1.5 hours?
Yeah,
okay.
instead of 45 minutes. Then
Nice.
put them into
Yeah, you come that far.
Wait, the subjects are paired together? Or
No,
the- Oh, you have double periods.
Yes.
Oh, good. That's a major step forward. Okay. So maybe math and Danish in the morning,
Yeah.
right? And then
Music.
something in the afternoon.
Music.
Music? Whoa.
Lucky.
Yeah.
Music and gym?
English.
What'd you say?
English.
English?
German.
Do you do that in the same day or do you do that on Tuesday?
Maybe.
On Tuesday.
Yeah, of course.
Of course. No, but I mean, like, some days one program, one set of classes, and then the next day a different set of classes. Okay. Excellent. And right in the middle, some lunch period. As short as possible in order to
20
get
minutes.
kids back to the classroom.
20 minutes? 20 minutes.
20 minutes?
Ah,
Okay, it's a little different depending on which school you go to. Nice. Okay. We do, yeah. Okay. So let's just think about what that means for the child, right? Let's pretend this was our actual day. We start with math, and we start thinking about, maybe it's algebra, right? And we're dealing with algebra, and we're getting our heads wrapped around this idea, and we're starting to build some internal scaffolding where these ideas are kind of clicking together and making sense. And if we're lucky, right at the point where we're getting kind of tired and we're exhausted and we need a break, we change and we start doing Danish. So you can look at it in that way and see it as very healthy. Like, we all need to take a break sometimes from these things. I never had a job that worked like this, like in my life. I started writing code professionally when I was 16. It never worked like this, but you could see it as a kind of healthy behavior, and maybe we should all do this, like deliberately do different things throughout the day. But mostly my jobs have been the same thing all day long. But in that context of building that math, we didn't give them very long for them to return to that, because maybe we're not going to hit math again until Wednesday, right? So whatever we did here, we're probably going to assign some homework so we keep it fresh. So on Wednesday, we haven't lost what we learned, right? Yeah. Okay. So that would be great if there were some huge, deep research to support that way of teaching children. It turns out that when we look at the neuroscience of long-term and short-term memory and how we transfer that information, we don't find anything that supports this. Nothing. But it's such a part of our social history that is just like I was talking with some of you about my new friends in Poland who, as a culture, are just kind of like looking back at their classrooms and going, wait, this is exactly how we did it when the communists were in charge, and we're still doing it that way. Why are we doing this? And now that it's opening up a whole lot of different questions, and I think we're going to see some really interesting innovations. This also comes because we have a funny idea about children. And when we think of a child, I'm going to draw a big one over here. When we think of this child, we think that when they're little kids, we're going to start filling them up with information, and by the time they graduate, they'll be filled up to the top and ready to be out in the world, right? So, and each of these slices, like this is the math, and here's some chemistry, here's some history. If we want, because you're in Denmark and Danish, we put right here over the heart. Right? And we can just fill this in, right? Now, I don't know if you're anything like me, but in my chemistry class, the most remarkable thing about my chemistry class was Nancy Smith. Nancy Smith smelled amazing. and the way we were arranged in chemistry class for the first year, she sat kind of right next to me. And I don't think I heard anything that Professor Campbell was saying, because I was thinking about Nancy Smith and how amazing she smelled. That part of my chemistry knowledge is gone. Not forever. I learned quite, soon that I could fill it in, but if you looked at my tests, you would see that part of my chemistry really is like it didn't happen. It just didn't happen. Maybe you got the flu. You got a terrible cold, or you got some terrible virus and you were out, or you had an injury, you were in a body cast. Maybe you had a very poor relationship with that teacher, and you just had that, like you couldn't make that connection, and everything she said to you was annoying and didn't make any sense, and she didn't seem to care about you, whatever. The truth is, you graduate from high school with holes, right? We work hard to make sure these holes are as small as possible and as few as possible, but the truth is we graduate with holes. It's true because we're all human, right? I mean, the relationship we have with knowledge is personal, and some of it makes sense and some of it doesn't make sense the way we first encountered it. And instead of giving children the notion that they could identify a hole and fill it, we give them the notion that for anything that you don't know, there's a class that you take, and they'll tell you how to do it, and then you'll know, right? And then you also have this notion that when you graduate, everything is filled in, and you're done learning. Well, I don't know about you, but I never had that threshold moment in my life. I never had that sense like, thank God I'm done with that. I can get on with my life now. I don't have to do any more learning. We hear American high school students say this all the time, both at the high school transition and graduating from college. When they graduate from college, they're like, I'm so sick of going to school. Well, it has been like, what, 22 years of, 17 years of school, 18 years of school? Yeah, 12 plus 4 and maybe 2 more. Who knows, in grad school? That's the most heartbreaking thing. People who graduate from grad school and all they can think is like, oh, I'm so glad I'm done with that. You know? There's a part of me that's excited that you're ready to get on with the rest of your life, but there's a part of me that's like, what about that was so unpleasant that now that it's done, you feel like you want to devote your life to whatever topic that was. You don't quite understand this, the schism there. Anyway, and again, I'm the guy who started a school but has no children, who didn't really go to school. So I just want to, I always like to make that clear. Like my perspective on school is as distorted as my perspective on children. So, so these holes are what became fascinating when we were starting to design this school. Is if you think about it, it's all holes, right? Big and small holes. We look like Havarti or something. You know, it's like all full of little holes. There's a cheese block there, but it's not, it's full of different sized holes. So the shape we see when we see the child doesn't seem to have any reflection of what they know. And the same is true with the grades and things like that. When we test the children, we don't seem to get a good sense of, we get a sense of the shape of the hole or the size of the hole, but we don't get a good sense of what they know. And we especially don't get a good sense of the things that they have done in their own understanding where they connect something in an unexpected way. Right? Those connections are the parts that don't come across when we test them. Because we don't know what to ask, right? There's no way to write a test question that's like, what did Descartes' realization about Cartesian coordinates tell you about that moment in history when, at the birth of sort of mathematics and science, that got you to think about this Danish sort of untold hero who did this thing that saved your country or whatever. I mean, you know, we never get that, right? Well, it turns out, you know, if we were to sort of peek inside the brain, all we see are the connections. There's no section in here that is math. There's a sort of like cluster of dense connections with connections running out to everything else, right? And this goes back to that idea in tinkering school, like if we had this emotionally charged adrenaline moment in our lives on a semi-regular basis, we would have such good recall of the things connected to that. So that moment when that airplane flew, I'll make a big dot for that, has all these connections to the science that we learned of aerodynamics around that airplane and anchors our recall of those things, which are connected to those things they did in class, right? Most of the kids who come to tinkering school go to traditional schools. And what they find is, I never knew what this was for until just now, right? So, long story short, this is what led us to this. So let me tell you about how we do it here.
To kind of summarize, I think what you're saying is the point is if every kid and every adult has these holes, what do they do about them?
Right.
And what happens when they come up to something in their life where they don't know the answer? Do they, you know, work to fill it? Or do they just feel bad about themselves and just like, oh, I don't know that. I don't know that.
Right.
I don't get it. You know, and I think the design was not make a perfect education that would leave a child without holes. It's just to create a learner that knows what to do when life throws them something they don't know.
Right. That's exactly right. That's much more well said than thank you. That's exactly right. Throughout your whole life, the discovery of a hole should be like, oh, there's something I don't know, right? Like you do when you're 6 and somebody shows you how to use a chop saw. It's like, oh, I have no idea. that delight at discovering the whole should stay with us, not just through the early part of our childhood where we're wired to have that positive response. We should never unlearn that positive response. Okay, so we took this and kind of set it aside, and we focused on this behavior of filling the holes. How do we habituate and create an environment where people like get excited about filling their holes? And the first thing we thought of was we shouldn't, this is going to sound funny, we shouldn't teach math, right? Like there shouldn't be anything that's like, now we're doing math. Although we often do that. Like all the time, you'll find kids in a classroom doing math. What's important about that is the reason they started doing math wasn't because now is when we do math, although even occasionally that's true. But it's because a question came, we discovered a hole, and the way to fill that hole was with math. And it had to do with something we were studying in the context of the arc. So let's talk about it. The arc. I've never tried to draw one leaning over, so forgive my handwriting. Okay, now, before I write the next word up here, we'll do this slightly interactively. You might have noticed the slogan for our school, everything is interesting. The proof of this is that there is no topic that won't make a good arc. So, I'll tell you a few of the arcs that we've done, and then I want you guys to pick one that's sort of unique from your perspective. So, we started with cities. We've done fairness, salt,
Mirrors.
rulers, as in things you measure with, clocks, mirrors. Tomorrow we start book. We just wrapped up photograph. We did locomotion. I can't remember what else. By hand, things that you make with your hands and how the hands work. So, if you had anywhere between 9 and 17 weeks for your entire school to focus on one topic and everything related to that topic, what would you choose? Go.
Glass.
Glass. Fantastic.
Architecture.
Architecture. Architecture. We often talk about architecture, and it's so big. It's like photograph. You feel like you could spend a couple of years on it. Yeah. Anybody else?
Composing music, for instance.
Oh, composing. Yeah. The creative act of composition. Yeah, fantastic. Anybody else have one they want to throw out? Okay. Oh, one more.
Doors.
What was it?
Doors.
Doors.
Yeah.
Wow. Nice. You know, in England, they had an amazing program for a couple of years. It was called Holes, Gaps, and Voids. And English school children went through this program that was just looking at the world as a collection of holes, gaps, and voids. And then, like, learning to see the world that way. Like, look at the space between buildings, not the buildings, and think about why that's there, and things like that. What did you say?
It just translated it into Danish.
Oh, what is it in Danish?
Midt og overgangen.
Ah, that sounds like one word. Okay, so let's take glass, because we have this little trick we do with topics, and just to challenge ourselves like we did with mirrors, let's imagine that this is one of the long arcs of the year, so 17 weeks. 17 weeks. Just think about that for a minute. We're going to spend 17 weeks with 49 children, 6 teachers, 4 administrative staff, the whole school focused on glass. And that's a totally, like, we could have picked that. So, okay, the arc is divided into 3 unequal parts. The first of these we call exploration. We're going to do this just like we would with our staff. You know, let's think about glass for a minute. Like, what are the important properties of glass? What role does it play in society? You know, what is its value to us as a people? What makes something glass and something else not glass, right? And then, what do people do with it? How, you know, how is it used? All of these questions, we just roll around. And who's the first expert? Like, none of us knows anything about glass. I mean, maybe some of you do. And I sort of know, I know how they made glass in the Sahara, you know, but I don't know much beyond that. So, who's an expert that we would want?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but you might want to invite me anyway.
Yeah.
When you do this. No, I'd call up the Corning Museum of Glass, and I think it's in the state of New York, because they've got all the history of glass. They are producing lots of glass,
Okay.
even for the industry. So surely they've got some experts. I can't just.
In
So-
the Chihuly School in Washington State.
Okay, let's get a historian, and we'll get someone from the Chihuly School, another expert to come in.
But in Corning, they're also doing all the arts and stuff. They've got major art classes. And you've got actually here nearby as well. I never went yet, but you've got somebody is doing like major art classes here in San Fran.
Yeah,
They're
there's
doing
a place called the Crucible in the East Bay, which
And Public
offers...
Glass here is
Yeah.
a nonprofit in the city. Yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Oh, there's
Yeah.
one in the city?
Yes, yes.
What's it called?
Public Glass.
Public Glass. All right.
The photo I put up is of glass blowers from there.
And I think they're doing fusing as well, glass fusing, and that's really interesting because you can like take everyday objects of glass and then make it melt, and you can stop and you can...
Okay, that's good. I mean, we're not actually going to plan 17 weeks of stuff. And this is definitely getting far enough that I'm like, this is a really good topic. Yeah.
We're going to take the kids to an ophthalmologist to look at all of the different kinds of lenses that they use to examine their eyes.
And also NASA. NASA's got one of the hugest lenses in the world. I think it's 10 meters in diameter, and when they made it, it took like 5 or 6 years to make, because it got a burning curve. So you heat it slowly, you know, like you put things in the fridge and they break because they couldn't stand the heat. And it took 5 or 6 years for them to actually make it melt and then to cool it down, because otherwise it would break. And that was huge for the kids to see.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So, let's just, we'll just put a big lens here.
What about bottles?
What about what?
Bottles. Glass bottles.
Glass bottles.
Bottles
Yeah.
made out of glass.
Yeah.
And the
Recycling
sound
plant.
of it.
Yeah, the glass recycling.
Is it only a
Glass
society
has
part
no
or?
recycling degradation. The same piece of glass can be remade over and over and over again. They say it's chemically indistinct in each phase. You can't say, oh, this has been through the recycling too many times. It might have impurities in it by then, but if you cook the impurities out, the recycling people told us, infinite number of times through the recycling.
How about could it can also be used for music?
Yeah.
You could play
Oh,
music
yeah.
on the bottles.
Sounds.
Does that go under exploring sounds, or?
Yeah, studying the resonant quality, the resonance, like wine glasses.
Yeah.
Yeah, you rub your finger on it.
And also, Some of the, I don't know if it's within gun production, Smith and Wesson stuff, but they do bulletproof glass as well, and that's in entire industry in, I don't know what to call it.
And the difference between blown glasses and slumping.
What?
Slump glass, hedder det ikke sådan?
Jo, det er, når du burer det, når du smelter det ned, det hedder fusing.
Fusing and
The first stage
blowing.
is fusing. We're fusing the parts of glass
This
together.
is how it goes. Now imagine there's 6 or 7 of us sitting around the table, and we're actually planning what's about to happen in the next 5 or 6 weeks, right? Because experts, you need time for them to clear their schedules and come in. And what we've discovered across the board, we can call 8 glass blowing experts and get a positive response from 2 of them, and 1 of them will actually come. If the kids call for us, 8 glass blowers will come into the school. Like if you get called up by a 10-year-old who's really excited about glass blowing and wants to see you, you can't stay away.
I think an important point to make, which is what you're saying, is that the kids do not decide these topics. The ARCs,
Right.
We take our knowledge of the kids into consideration when we pick, but we believe that any kid can find something that will interest them in any topic if we are doing our jobs right. But it is not child-led in the planning process.
Right.
Yeah.
Is this the teacher's planning process?
Teachers, are integral in this. And then as soon as we get started, and actually as soon as the kids hear what the next topic is going to be, they start feeding ideas into that system too. Because they know a good idea will show up here or here.
In fact, if anyone wants to see this, I noticed while we were in Philip's space that all of the Post-it notes on his whiteboard are his kids talking about the ARC that's starting on Monday and things that they think would be interesting to do. And they mirror almost exactly what our staff has come up with. It's
Right.
really interesting.
Yeah, they're incredibly good at it, and they make connections that we might not. You know, they don't have that self-critical thing in there. Well, sometimes they have it worse than we do, but often when they're in a playful mood, amazing kind of things will come out of them, and if we just capture it, suddenly a great new event happens. So,
can I ask you?
Yeah.
Do you consider what the kids are going to learn from this, or do you have a faith in that they will learn something and that's good for them, but we don't want to control it or plan
Sure.
it?
Yeah, so we have the faith, right? And then the collaborator, when they're doing the planning, looks for those opportunities to connect to those skill developments that we look for. So when we're doing glass at the ophthalmologist and it's connected to the big lens, if you sort of look through here at all the optics related ones, you might see the teachers doing stuff around focal length and things like they just did with camera, right? I mean with photograph, where there's a lot of fun math connected to that object and that device, and so the conversations that they're having in the classroom dip into math and back out again and back in again and back out again. Sort of, we want the children to see something like math, which is the question we're most frequently asked by nervous parents. When are they going to learn math? The truth is they're learning math all the time. We just don't often have something we call math class, although sometimes, you know, they'll spend the morning in a mathematical mode, right? So this is the exploration phase, and the child's journey through this, if we draw a child on here, a student, I should say, the student, you know, goes on this curated journey, meeting these experts, having these experiences, both inside the classroom and outside the building. My favorite statement about the building is one that Ellen made early on, which is, the building is just here as a convenience to keep people from stealing our stuff while we're not here. You know, I can't remember exactly how you said it, but it was something like that. Like the whole idea of the classroom as a limitation had to be taken out because we wanted the kids out in the world having real world experiences. So a lot of our parents, when they visit us for the first time, tell us, when we ask them, how did you hear about this school? Oh, I met one of your students while they were on a field trip. So that works great in two ways. But this student's journey through this experience is unique, right? We can't force a visiting expert to meet with all of the kids every time. So they meet with small batches of the kids, and some of the kids meet that expert and some don't, and enough experts come in that there's not an equality issue. It's really celebrating the different viewpoints that start to collect. So every child's journey through this is a little bit different. And the things that they connect with, the ideas that they hang on to, we pay attention to as a staff. So if they're at the glass blowers and they have this amazing experience, we make a note that for that child, that glass blower was amazing. It's we try to get the kids to actually make that note, and they get better at it as they get older, but it shows up in all kinds of interesting ways. 42 pictures in Instagram at the glass blower, and 2 from the recycling center. You know, it's those kinds of things. They're not always clear when they try to describe what they're most interested in, but if we look at where they were engaged and things like that, we can see where that particular student made a connection. Again, our collaborators are working with 8 students, and that's 8 sets of connections. Our teachers who came to us from public schools with 28 students in the classroom have told us it's not any less work to work with 8. It's in a lot of ways it's actually easier to work with 28 because you're moving them like cattle, you know, intellectually and physically. And here with 8, especially 8 autonomous students, you know, where they have a lot of self-volition, where they make a lot of choices and move around the building on their own choices, it's a lot more work. But, okay, so these things happen. We're paying attention to that. They're meeting lots of outside experts. Our children talk to adults differently. That's a frequent comment we get from visitors when they're visiting our students, is our children talk to adults in a much more like one-to-one or direct way. It doesn't have a lot of that formal child-adult relationship in it, which is sometimes good and sometimes bad, because they can be just as rude to an adult as they can be to their best friend. Okay, so this is, of our 17 weeks, this was 8 weeks. Two months of exploration. Lots of things happening during this phase. They're blogging, they're doing math, they're meeting with experts, they're doing research to find an expert. If their conversation in that class has gone in some new interesting direction and it's spiraling out into some new topic, we're going to scramble to find somebody who has an expertise there, or the collaborator is going to try to figure out, like, how do we learn more about this thing? Can we get them on Skype if we can't get them in here in person? All of those things are possibilities. So these tangents often happen starting like around week 3 of the arc, because the kids are engaging with the topic and they're starting to make connections and they're doing research and things and hitting these new ideas. As this phase winds up, there's this kind of gray area in the transition. Some of the kids are transitioning early, some of them are transitioning late. But the next phase of this we call expression. So we use this term because all forms of expression are acceptable. The 2 girls who got excited about chemistry during SALT ended up doing a dance about covalent and ionic bonding. And it involved a free electron that they passed between them and their giant poop skirts that had there are electron shells on them. And it was great. Or no, it was, they ended up doing it on wands.
Yeah.
Yeah. But this transition is marked by a little piece of tradition and artifice that we call a declaration. This is a clear statement that kids write to the school saying, this is what I'm going to do during the expression phase. And they iterate on that with their collaborators. So their collaborator is sort of helping them write a good declaration. The reason for that is we want that project that they take on to be something they're both excited about and involves and includes things that they don't know yet. We want it to move them out of what we call their comfort zone, right? And you guys are familiar with Vygotsky and the whole notion of zone of proximal development. So the declaration should overlap their comfort zone and their development zone, so that they have things they can feel confident about, and then things that they are a stretch for them, right? And that's why they iterate with the collaborator, because yes, the kids often try to give us a declaration where it's like, this just doesn't sound like very much work for you, you know, when we read them. It just doesn't feel like it's worthy of 8 weeks of their time. So they get their declaration approved, and this happens across the school. And sometimes it happens early, and sometimes it happens a little later. And sometimes the kids join up on a declaration. So you could have a couple of kids. I think the most we've ever had was 4. But then we've had some all band, where the whole band decides to do the same thing. So the kids write these declarations, and there's a little bit of a ceremony where they get their declaration approved, and it's important to them. It's important to honor that. And then they start working on it. And this is where it's important. We have to talk about the actual structure of a day at Brightworks. So I'm going to go back over to this side of the board. Make a clear line between that diagram and our diagram. Everybody has this rectangle. It's a day, right? Ours starts at 9:15. And it ends at 15:30. And yeah, we have a break in the middle of the day we call park. And we don't get to use this lovely little courtyard back here. It's not in our rental agreement. So the kids walk up the street to the park that's 2 blocks away. And then they come back here and they have a half hour for lunch. So it takes an hour and a half out of the middle of our day, 90 minutes, right? The day is divided by that. What the collaborators do with their band is up to them. So I call it the A block in the morning and the B block in the afternoon, but it just hasn't caught on with the collaborators. So, and if you looked at all of the bands, the one common element that they seem to all have agreed on is after lunch, there's just kind of a quiet period in the building. There's no construction going on, and the kids are reading. So like, it's just a shared, emergent agreement that's happened. It's nothing that Ellen or I told them to do, right? So, so that's the structure of our day. And what we find is the mornings are often focus-oriented, skill development, like math or something like that. And the afternoons are often constructive, creative, some kind of physical embodiment of what's going on. It's not always true, and it doesn't all, like, if an expert is coming in the morning, but we're still working through the kids want to get back to that programming problem or that math problem, they can just, demand it. So it's adaptable. The schedule is adaptable. It's not a lot of constraint per se. When the expression phase starts, we still have the commitment to the parents that these kids are progressing to a certain degree in various areas, what we call core curriculum, math, reading, history, science, those kinds of things. So we see the collaborators tending to use the morning block to focus on art-related content that builds skills. And then afternoon block is for the kids' projects. Now, a really large project with external dependencies, like you're working with an expert from outside, means that student misses a lot of these because they're off-site or they're in the shop or they have to get this thing built in order to show it to the expert and get their comments to do the iteration. So during the expression phase, this gets this sometimes takes sort of backseat to the project. Does that make sense? I'm just trying to figure out how to explain that without using an American colloquialism. But the idea is, if you don't know what you're working on, come on over and join us. We're working on something cool in the classroom. But if you do know what you're working on, go do that. So as the kids age up, we see them taking more and more advantage of that, doing larger, more complicated projects. So that gets us into the expression phase, where the most important thing to us, and we're not experts at this yet, it's not working 100% of the time, is that the child is iterating that project forward to this date out here. Okay, we want to see multiple iterations. We want to see kind of continuous progress, and we're getting better at it. It's working better and better. A lot of people think it's working great. I still have some hopes and aspirations for how much better it could be. But whether, if it's a design thinking problem, they're going to make a product or something like that. That fits that model pretty well. But what if it's a writing project and it's just hours and hours of writing? Well, we want to see that word count moving along. We want to see, if that team of writers is negotiating the plot and stuff like that. We want to see the residue of that. We want to see evidence of that. Yeah.
And how do you understand iteration? I ask because sometimes I see iteration as someone else looking at your work, in this case the teacher, right, and telling you what to do better. And it's not an iteration to me. No. I mean, you have to go back and do something different and throw something away.
Throw something out.
But could you explain or give an example of what is an iteration to you?
Actually, I think I have one in the presentation right after this. Yeah. So we'll talk about that, because that's an important aspect.
Og hvad betyder iteration?
Iteration, altså det betyder simpelthen, i stedet for at man går lige til en linje og ligesom arbejder fra et nulpunkt og bygger på og bygger på og bygger på, indtil man er færdig, så tager man ligesom hele tiden tilbage, så man siger, man laver op på noget, altså. Hvad siger du?
Gentagelse.
Altså
det er, at man også bryder processen op, i stedet for at køre en lang proces, og så er vi færdige, og så evaluerer vi, så tænker vi, hold kæft, det er jo noget lort. Så tager vi det op i små bidder, faser, og så siger vi, en fase ad gangen. Ja. Og når den fase ligesom er slut, så ser vi på, lærte vi det, vi skulle, vi går et lille skridt tilbage, og så kører vi en ny fase, så man bruger det egentlig op i sådan nogle elementer.
Hvad siger, er der nogen, der siger loop learning? Ja, det lyder. Ja. Det lyder som det.
Med den designmodel, der er i skema.
Yeah, do a very simple iteration. You have the idea, you build a prototype, you test it, you reflect on the results of that testing, which changes your idea, so you build a new prototype, right?
And that's actually the point, that it changes your idea.
Yeah.
It's not that you keep your idea and then you just make a product that gets better and better the more you work on it, but you actually change your idea or make a
and that's this over time.
Yeah.
So we want to see whatever they described here, and what they end up with here. If it's different, that's good, right? So. Just got dark. Okay, so that sets us up for this last phase. This is one of the hard dates in Brightworks, is the date of the exposition. Exposition. Pardon my handwriting. Yeah. So we open the doors of the school and the public comes in, and often we find that experts come back to see what happened, to see what the kids did, or just to congratulate the students they were working with, and this exposition moment here is the first year you're at Brightworks. It's kind of like, you get anxious, and then it happens, but you wish you had more done, and there's a lot of and this happens too to students who've been here for all 4 years that we've been open. It still happens sometimes. You just wish you were further along, but that's part of the purpose of this process, is for you to let that cycle of gathering information and coming up with an idea, deciding what you're going to do to express that idea, reflecting on that idea, and then starting another one. It's a habit, right? It's a productive habit of healthy adults to have ideas and see them through to the best version they can make and decide whether they're going to do it again. So, yeah.
Do the kids document the expression process? I mean, do they keep a folder with the images or sketches?
So we produce probably between 200 and 500 pieces of media a week in the school. Most of it goes to our Flickr account. So if you just want to peek in at the school at some point, you can go to our blog, which is on our main website, and click on any picture. It takes you to the Flickr account, and in the Flickr account, you see the unedited flow of what's coming off the cameras of the students and the adults here. So, sometimes pretty, sometimes stupid, sometimes it's a wonderful thing. It's like what's that phrase? Drinking from the fire hose. So in this last phase here, there are a couple of things that we want to do, and as you can tell, it's 1 week long. Sometimes we tack on an extra week in here if we need it. If this has been an especially engaging, deep arc, sometimes we need an extra week in here. But a period of reflection, back on what you did. You know this version of the word reflection?
Yes.
Looking back? Okay. Yeah. I was in Slovakia, and they don't have the exact. That word doesn't mean looking in the mirror and looking back. They have separate words for that. So, so that reflection process is long. They're working on updating their blogs. They're maybe making portfolio entry to sort of summarize the whole project and gather parts out of previous blog posts and put it all together, trying to figure out how to tell that story both to themselves and the outside world. There is also, honestly, a little bit of a sense of rest. You find the classroom schedule, such as it is, gets relaxed a little bit, and you find kids scattered around, just hanging out, reading on the couches and things like that. It's a recovery, kind of like letting all that stuff settle, and then taking a deep breath, and then getting ready for the next arc. Which in our case is going to be book. I'm super excited about it. Okay, that is the Brightworks arc. The very first arc of the year is 9 weeks long in order to get the new kids all the way through an arc so they know what to expect. And then the next 2 arcs of the year are 17 weeks. So that's the structure of our year. We put photograph as the first arc because we knew we could, all those things that we wished we'd done in photograph, we can go back and do during book, and in the last arc, which is movie, we can do that. We can pick up those photograph topics again. So the kids will be taking